again, scripture says, consider others as higher than yourself. We need to come in as leaders with this posture of humility into the conversation, going, okay, you know what? I want to make sure that I understand really the whole situation. Again, the reality. I want to make sure we craft a shared story. And then the plan has to be targeted at the right thing, right? Right solution. And sometimes that's hard to do in a 1 hour meeting, right? You need to kind of go away and process and pray over, okay, what just happened? What did I learn from this? And then it's okay to come back, but make sure you do come back. Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the Future is Here podcast, where we talk about leadership principles that you need to lead this next generation. My name is Robert Aboides. I'm here with my man, Tommy Nixon.
That's right.
And today we're going to talk about something that is probably one of the more difficult things of leadership, which is, what do you do when somebody is not performing?
You get rid of them. No?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, folks, for joining us. Yeah, you know, we all have, as leaders and especially as managers, I think we've all dealt with employees or staff or people, just even volunteers, right, that aren't towing the line, so to speak, that maybe aren't performing. But how do you deal with that? How do you, in an organization, handle those individuals in a way? Obviously, as believers, you know, we want to show a lot of grace, we want to show a lot of love and a lot of care, and we talk a lot about leadership as, you know, people being in your care, not in your charge, right? It's one of the things we say. And so how do you do that so that you still establish a culture of accountability, a culture of growth, and a culture of support within the organization? So let's dive into some of this already. Tommy, what do we do when someone's not performing?
Well, again, this really connects to our core belief about leadership, is that my job is to help those around me become who they were created to be while in the vehicle of whatever it is I'm leading. So what we're going to talk about today is at the core of that, because this is the opportunity when someone's underperforming. This is the opportunity to actually help them become who they are created to be. But if you don't think about that, if we don't have that framework, you're not going to do that. They're just going to be a barrier instead of an opportunity. And then this is the way you do it. So one of the things that's really important about this is to understand that in the process of what we're going to share with you today, you are creating culture at your organization.
Yeah.
And we've talked through culture on previous episodes, but creating the culture of the organization is really important. The act of what we're talking about today actually does that, and it's really important. So when you establish a culture of accountability, of growth, of like that there's support within the organization, it's really important. When you're expressing clear expectations. And so let's get really clear about this. Job descriptions. Like, I know that might seem like, oh yeah, but that's the problem right there. You didn't take the time to be really clear with somebody. This is what our expectations of you. You didn't revisit that. You write it once and then never look at it again. It's really important to have that that clear communication and expectation of that. And then it's also like you're creating the culture by leading and as an example and fostering of continuous improvement and feedback. If I'm helping you become who you're created to be, that needs feedback. That goes both ways. And I need to allow that to make me as a leader better. It's a dynamic process. We've talked about that. But as we do this between me and the other leader, what it should be doing and what we want you guys to do is actually help that then create the overall org, church, institution, whatever it is, that's creating that culture there. And if you miss that about this and you only see it as this person's a problem, they're messing up my plan, I got to deal with them, you are missing out on something, a whole lot bigger movement, I think, what God wants to do.
Yeah, I think there's this kind of unspoken fallacy about this in leadership, Tommy, that I think as leaders, sometimes we tend to think that, you know, I'm an awesome leader, so everybody I lead is going to be awesome. Yeah. And things are just going to go well because I'm such a great leader, because I do so well, and because everybody loves me, and because, you know, I have this great vision and we have this mission.
Gift. I have a great gift.
I have a gift, right? And talk about that. And so therefore, everybody that comes along is just going to be awesome. And so there's a tendency then not to pay attention to the people that you're leading, not to pay attention to your staff, because you're like, of course they're going to be awesome. Look, everything is really awesome. And then what happens is we don't notice it until it's causing a problem, right? It's like a I don't know if chink in the armor is probably not the right analogy, but it's more like there's something gets stuck in the cog, right? And the wheels are stopped turning because somebody's not carrying their weight or not performing. So I think the first thing, once you built this culture of growth, right? Once you have communicate clear expectations, is I think as a leader, you have to pay attention to your people, right? It's really important to recognize the signs of underperformance before they start underperforming, because people will give you signs. You will start to, if you're paying attention, you will start to see signs of underperformance before they actually crash and burn your organization even, right? Because you haven't been paying attention. So it's important, I think, there's a first step to recognize those and address them early on. The minute you start seeing some, let's call them yellow flags, right?
Yeah.
Address the yellow flags before they become red flags.
Absolutely. And so when someone's underperforming, one, you got to recognize the signs and try to recognize them early. If you're not paying attention to your people, you're actually not living in what we're trying to prescribe to you. Say, do leadership this way.
Right.
Because when you're so busy with the activity and you're only using people as a means to help promote whatever God has given you to do, that's a different type of leadership we're talking about. When you're aware of that and you really do think deeply about your people towards that vision and mission that God's given you, that's what we're talking about. So one, understand those signs. The second is you want to try to find the root cause of the performance issue. Now, here's what we want to caution you of. Immediately, I don't know if this is just because of our sinful nature, we're human. Immediately, what's the first thing you do? You blame who?
Oh, the person, of course.
The person is the issue, right? We would say this. We would say that for 85% of the time, it's not the person, it's the structure. Right? 10% of the time, it's going to be a leadership issue. And 5% of the time, it's going to be about that person is like, they're not a good fit. Their giftings or how they're created to be, they're not in the right role. Now, normally you would switch that and be like, 85% of the time, it's them, 10% of the time, it's probably them again. And maybe 5% of the time, it's maybe I'm missing something.
Or they didn't hear me correctly.
They didn't hear me correctly, right?
So it's still them.
So here's what we want to share with you guys. When we talk about structure, so if 85% of the time it's a structure piece, this is how you make your organization better. If they're underperforming or they're not doing what you want them to do, stop, look at what are the structures around them that help them understand the expectations, how you want them to do their job, and what they're actually supposed to be doing towards the vision and mission that you've given. You have to, so an easy one, is there a job description? That's a structure.
Yeah.
Right? So you want to kind of take that kind of path of maybe least resistance and just go, the way that they're moving through your organization is they found the way that just, oh, well, this seems right. And if you don't want them to behave like that, so if someone shows up late all the time, there's some structures there, there's some cultural things there that aren't in line with how you want to do it. So first, I don't just go, they're lazy. Well, they seem, hey, everybody else shows up late. Hey, you as the boss show up late. I thought that,
and you've never communicated that's a value,
right?
To show up on time,
right? And there's actually no culture gets shaped by the things that are shamed and the things that are honored.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
So if you're not, if there's not a conversation or if there's not a mention in the staff meeting, hey, we need to be here on time and here's why, this is the value.
Now, let me stop. That might have hit some people a little sideways.
Okay, go ahead.
because you just said culture is shaped by the things that are shamed and the things that are valued.
Yeah.
So the shaming thing feels uneasy to us. Can you talk a little bit more about what that really looks like in your organization?
So, and a lot of times I'm not saying that it's shame like, so you walk in late and I go, oh, look at what do we got here? You know what I mean? And you're a piece of trash because although I've heard of places that are like that.
Yeah.
And if you're coming from a shame-based culture, there's a lot of things that happen that
shame boards, bro.
Yeah.
I've heard of places that have shame boards.
Yeah.
Like they'll post your name up if you've, violated policy or something and be like, yeah.
So here's the thing about shame. It's already happening in your organization. And if you're not intentional about it, now I'm not saying you intentionally shame people, But if you're actually not saying, here's what we value and here's what we don't value, and you're explicit about that and you get those down and you create policies around those and those kind of things, I'm not saying we go around shaming, but what we're saying is between shame and honor would be something like somebody does something really well or within the way that we value things and they get praised for it.
Yeah. So I think this is a really important, first question to ask yourself as a leader when you've identified or someone has been identified as not performing, right? We're saying if 85% of the time it's a structure issue, then the first question we should ask ourselves as leaders is, hey, what about their job role, their description, the structures around them? What about that is maybe causing this?
That's right.
Right? Not why is the person doing this, but what is causing that person to have to function in that way, right? I imagine if you're putting a bunch of obstacles in the way of a person where there's only one path for them to take, and that's not the path you wanted, it's not their fault.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? It's your fault for putting those particular obstacles and creating that particular path, which we're calling the path of least resistance. Because what you really want them to do is like, oh, you should have ignored that obstacle, but you put it there.
Yeah, I mean, if you put the doorway right here, I'm not going to go through the wall.
Right.
But if everybody's walking through the window, maybe that's easier and I'm just going to go do. So it's about the structures that you create.
Yeah.
And the first question shouldn't be directed at the person. It should be directed towards the leader.
Right.
How are we have structures here that set up that's allowing that type of behavior or creating the structure that's the result that we're getting?
Yeah. No, that's good.
And that's what we're talking about. The second part of that is the leadership, that 10% is leadership. So saying like, I'm not communicating well as a leader. And so we have the structures in, and here's a big one. If I spend all this time, 85%, I've created all these structures, and me as the leader don't follow those structures.
You're not modeling what you're saying.
How many organizations are like that?
Yeah. Or it applies to everybody else, but not
me. And I work hard here to make sure that, hey, what goes for me goes for everybody.
Yeah.
Like that's the idea of when we think about equity and we think about all that. Now, I carry different responsibilities. There are different pay structures. There are things like that. But that's equitable. Like we've thought through all those things. And so a lot of the time that 10% is, okay, what's actually going on here? And this is where the leader can also front themselves. Listen, I am created this certain way. I didn't eat that day.
Yeah.
And so I was a little salty and my interaction was there. I got to own that kind of stuff. I've got to start going, okay, in my leadership, I'm not leading in a way that produces the type of results that I want from this person.
Yeah. I think what we're saying is in that 10% where it's a leadership issue, it really boils down to there is a problem with the way that we're communicating or the way that we're behaving as a leader that is causing them to either underperform or to act a particular way, right? And so I think what's really important about that is when we're talking about communicating, we're not saying that it's a leadership issue and you're saying, well, see, you didn't hear me correctly. That's actually putting blame on the person, right? What we're saying is you as a leader need to ask yourself, what did they hear? Hey, when I said that, what was it? What did you hear? Ask them the question, right? And maybe they'll tell you, oh, well, I thought you were talking about this. Like, oh, no, that wasn't. And now there's an opportunity for clarification, right? Yeah. But again, you're not putting the blame on them. You're putting it on yourself. You're like, oh, I wasn't clear. I apologize because I wasn't clear about that.
But once you're clear about it, then whose responsibility is it?
Yeah, now you've put the responsibility on them. Like, okay, are we good? You understand now? This is what I meant. This is what we're doing. Yes, okay. Well, now if there's underperformance, you have a legitimate opportunity then to correct the individual on their performance because you agreed that there was clear communication.
Now, let me tell you guys how this works out because the last part of this, I mean, if you think of it's SLY, S-L-Y, right? So structure, leadership, or the person, or the or the you is what you. It's the person that's not actually in the right spot. How this works out is as I fixed those structure issues, as I've looked at myself and communicated better, that's 95% of the problem.
Yeah.
And now if you've created those boundaries really clearly and they continue to step out of those boundaries, or they're not performing in the way that you want them to, it's just a sit down going, I don't know if this is the right role for you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, you won't believe me on this. 98% of my hard talks in this area, and I've had a lot of them, have always turned out really well. 98% of these. There's only been a couple times where the person didn't take the feedback. They were surprised by something, but I'm like, by the time we got here, we've had these conversations over and over again, and you should have already known this isn't the right role. In fact, most of the time when I say, yeah, I don't know if this is the right role, they're like, oh, yeah, I don't think it is. And they're killing themselves and feeling terrible every day because they know that they're underperforming.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible place to have them. Have the conversation, then create the plan on how do you get them out. Maybe they go into a different place, not because you feel bad for them, but because they're suited for it. Or you say, what can we do as a plan to launch you out of this place, but in a way that's equitable and graceful and care for you, not just like you're out.
Yeah.
And I've made mistakes in that too, but
yeah, I've had similar experiences that when you care about people and you're leading them well, and you're clear about the structures and you're clear about your communication, that when it gets to that point, again, they usually know, and they're not going to come up to you and go, hey man, I'm doing really poorly.
Yeah, you should fire me.
You should fire me or you should let me go. But they know something's up. And so usually, you kind of start the conversation with, hey man, I've noticed, we had these conversations and I noticed that things are still not going well. And then you can have that conversation about, well, what does this mean really? What does this mean for you? What does this mean for us? Right? What does this mean for your time here? Maybe you're not, and again, it could be that they're not in the right role and you can move them to another role because you do value the individual and they have gifts that can benefit the organization. Or maybe the organizational culture itself and the organizational mission and vision is just not something that aligns with their heart. And that's okay.
That's absolutely okay.
And sometimes that happens because maybe somewhere along the line, like for example, you came in with new leadership, right? It's possible that your interpretation of, not that you changed the mission and vision, but your interpretation of the mission and vision and how you are feeling called to lead this organization might be something that staff that have been here for a while now don't feel aligned with.
Yeah.
And either they'll make the decision like, oh yeah, this is no longer aligning with me, which is okay. We want to bless them in that. Or that you will have to have the conversation and go, hey, I feel like we're no longer aligned here. Let's have that conversation.
And both of those things happened here.
Yes.
Didn't they? Yeah.
They did.
And that was totally fine. And all those relationships, almost all of them, are great.
Sure.
There's no broken relationship. There's one instance in there where there wasn't really a relationship and that person just realized, nope, they're heading in a way that I don't want to go. And that's great.
Yeah.
And so as you think about that, when we talk about having the talk, here's what we mean by that, right? We one way to talk about it is a moment of truth. Yeah. And so there's a really simple thing. So if someone's underperforming,
it's not, by the way, I've heard it called come to Jesus moment.
Come to Jesus moment, right?
but it's better to say moment
of truth. So what we're saying is, right, if someone's underperforming, 85% structure problem, 10% leadership issue, or it's 5%, it's a you issue, meaning it's the person's not a good fit.
Yeah.
So then how do you have that conversation, which we're going to call a moment of truth? And there's really kind of a 4-step process. So
yeah.
What's that first step?
I think the first step is we just have to establish reality, right? And a lot of times when you go into these conversations, you go into it with like, well, here's my story versus your story, right? And immediately that's a combative situation, right? Where you're not trying to hear them and they're not trying to hear you, and you're
arguing who's right.
Like in an hour meeting, 50 minutes of it is just you guys arguing about, your side of the story versus their side of the story. And that actually doesn't really help at all to move the conversation forward. So I think it's important to first establish reality, establish the facts. There's a term which is that shared facts create a shared story.
Yeah.
And so you want to get to that shared story. Do we agree that these are the facts, right? Hey, so you had 4 projects that were due, right? And none of them met the deadlines and they all came in over budget. Do we agree on that? We're not talking about why yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it's easy to jump into like, well, it's because, and like, no, we're not. And as a leader, it's okay to go, no, we'll get there.
Yeah.
But can we these are the facts,
This
right?
is reality.
This is reality. So let's start with that.
So I will say on that, how you get there, friends, is that's why you do 85% of the structure.
Yeah.
Because to be able to have clear facts needs a lot of structure. Is there performance development plans? Is there a clear metric system? Is it? And all that takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean when you have the conversations and you go, hey, you're not meeting this. And they say, well, I didn't know that was what you wanted me to do. Great. Let's build a structure around that.
Yeah.
How does that person know they're winning? Let's build a structure around that. And this is the hard work of creating orgs or running your institution or your church or your business in a really healthy way. So number one, reality. Number two, it's that shared story that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, okay, are we in reality here? The shared story is, we're really saying are you and I understanding what the problem actually is? Is there a shared story? One of the ways I like to think about this is the person's not the barrier. If you think about it in a visual, I'm not sitting across the table going, I need to show you how you're wrong. What I'm saying is, hey, we have a problem here. Can you come stand next to me? And can we look at the problem together?
Yeah.
Can we have a shared story about what this problem is? And again, you go back to Sly, you go, is it structure? Help me figure this out. Is it structure? Is it leadership? Or is it you?
Yeah.
And
that's good.
And you're starting to really look at it. There's a great book on this, by the way, called Fierce Conversations that I've used that talks about mining, like mineral rights, kind of like you're mining for the truth together. And that book has a whole step-by-step process, which is really great. Go check that out. And you use Sly to focus on, okay, what is the problem that we need to get here so that you leave that with a shared story. Here's what happened. Here's how we got there. Here's what we're going to do to get out of it.
Which, by the way, in marriage, this works really great as well. So it's not just organizational leadership, but marriage leadership, right? Is that this opportunity to establish reality of, hey, what happened? What happened here, right? The reality, and sometimes in that case, there's the reality of, hey, you made me feel this way, or I felt this particular way, right? And so you acknowledge those things, establish the reality, and then, like you said, we always when we mentor couples, we tell them that hey, when you have a problem that you're dealing with, don't put it between you, because you usually overlook the problem right at the person, and the person becomes the problem. So put it in front of you, beside you, above you. My wife and I always talk about laying in bed, looking up at the ceiling, and having those hard conversations that way, so that we're not actually distracted by body language, even. Right? Because that's really good. Important.
Yeah.
Sometimes you may not be saying anything, but your body language, if you're just crossing your arms, and as they're talking, that's sending a big message. So establishing this shared story, I think, is really important.
That's also next then is that plan. Yeah. So you agree on the shared story, right? So first you establish reality, you have the shared story, you talk through that, and then you use Sly, right? As a way to plan. And remember, friends, 95% of the time, the shared story piece is that as you sit next to each other, metaphorically speaking, and you're looking at the problem, 95% of that problem is going to be structure or communication.
Yeah.
And so as a humble leader, it's okay for you to also you have to take responsibility for that. You're
Absolutely.
Right. That wasn't clear enough. I could have done better here. You could have done better here. And so you have to wrestle with that 95% of it. So the next one is you plan. So if it's a structure, revise the structure and invite them in to help fix that. It's not all on you all the time. Second, if it's the leader, I got to clarify the vision there. I have to think about the milestones and the goals that I'm setting. Yeah. So, and how am I communicating that? It's very important for the leader. So again, thinking through that. And then if it's you, if it's the person, right, you have to have the hard conversation to say, you have to be decisive in finding them another spot or moving them from it.
Absolutely.
And I would also guide you on a real practical note. As you're having these conversations, do not make the decision off like on the spot.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Okay, it was good. We'll come back to this. And again, go back to our other episode about consensus. And if you have a management team or a leadership team, invite them in on going, man, what should we do?
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's okay to leave that conversation without a decision, right? To be like, hey, I really need to, okay, now that I've heard this, because sometimes you might be hearing something for the first time in those conversations. Yeah. And so let's just be honest, okay, to our leaders out there. One, as Tommy was talking about this, I want you to think about the conversations that you've had with underperformers. What percentage of the time have you really thought about structure or you versus what percentage of the time is it really about them? I feel like maybe 99% of leadership conversations with underperformers is always like, you need to change. You need to do something different. Hey, it's this way or the highway, right? Let's just be honest. Because that's how we've been taught to lead. That's how we've been taught to deal with underperformers.
Yeah.
But, I think as believers, we need to really think about, again, scripture says, consider others as higher than yourself. We need to come in as leaders with this posture of humility into the conversation, going, okay, you know what? I want to make sure that I understand really the whole situation. Again, the reality. I want to make sure we craft a shared story. And then the plan has to be targeted at the right thing, right? Right solution. And sometimes that's hard to do in a 1 hour meeting, right? You need to kind of go away and process and pray over, okay, what just happened? What did I learn from this? And then it's okay to come back, but make sure you do come back and tell them, hey, here's how we're going to move forward. Here's what I think the best way is to do that.
I love that, man. So the last one is just feedback. It's that follow-up, make sure that there's accountability, that things were written down, that you do what you say you're going to do. And that should move towards the changing of the behavior or the performance on that. And if not, you're going to have another moment of truth. So you go, okay, great. Yeah. I changed the structure. I'm going to communicate better. You've agreed to it because we've had that shared story. Here's the feedback. We got to follow up on it. And if it's a performance issue, okay, 30 days, we're going to come back and examine that and go through the same thing again, right? Have that moment of truth, look at the reality, right? Share the shared story. What's the plan? And then you got to figure out, are we moving you on or what? So,
yeah, I think too, there's when you're preparing for that conversation, right? I think you have to, as a leader, get yourself in the right mindset and set your heart in the right place before. Don't just come in like a bulldozer, all hot, like, oh man, this person, making me look bad, and they're, and other people are complaining. When you if you let it get to that point because you haven't been paying attention, that just conversation is not going to go well, right? Yeah. And you might think it went well because you got what you wanted, but at the end of the day, like you're destroying another person really in that process, right? And I don't use that word lightly, but you're destroying their self-esteem, their self-identity. There's a lot of things, right? You also don't know whatever trauma, or organizational trauma or personal trauma they may be carrying into that. And so for us to not really pay attention, to not show grace, to not show empathy, to not have integrity when we're having those difficult conversations, that means those conversations are not going to go, first of all, they're not going to go well. Second of all, they're not going to glorify God. And that should always be a goal of ours. So I think understanding the significance of the moment of truth in performance issues, I think for me, this is how I've approached difficult conversations. And I can't stand them. I don't like them. I try to avoid them, to be honest, right? My nature is just not to be confrontational, but my nature is not to shy away from it. It's just to ignore it. It's like, well, whatever, go away. I mean, I'm just being honest. But I've had to, probably since I got into full-time ministry, I've had to do this more than I ever had in the corporate world. But here's what I do. Before the conversation, I pray, I prepare, and I plan for it. And one of the things that has been, I cannot emphasize how fruitful this prayer has been. My prayer has been, Lord, will you have the conversation with them first? Before I even get there, will you speak to their heart? Yeah. Would you just let them know? And I am telling you, the number of times that I prayed that prayer and show up to the meeting and the person pretty much confesses, because again, they know you're meeting with them about something. Yeah. And that works, by the way, whether it's a top-down meeting with an employee or a staff or volunteer, whether that's a peer meeting or whether that's
leading up.
You're leading up, right? having that prayer, like, Lord, would you have this conversation with them first, is, I think, really important. The second thing on the preparing is make sure you have your facts clear. Like, don't come in and be like, oh, well, these people told me that you were, you know what I mean? I heard that you was talking about me like this, and I heard you've been doing this.
Ask
and they're
questions.
like,
yeah.
And they're like, I wasn't even at that meeting. You're like, oh, what? So you got to be careful not to bring in the chisme, what, I just lost the word in English. The gossip. Don't bring in the gossip.
Yeah, the gossip.
Thank you. Make sure you have your facts clear, and then also come ready with a plan. If you know the situation well enough, come ready to with a plan and be clear on how you're going to move forward with that.
Yeah, man. And also too, during the conversation, make sure you're asking questions and provide the space for them to share their facts and perspective, and be okay if it's different than yours, and be like, oh, I see that. I didn't realize that. Yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing that. That's the kind of posture you want. I mean, practice active listening, empathy, and that the Lord working on your heart in that is really important, because a lot of times you're like, dude, you're ruining my life right now. Like, what's your problem? When you get into that space and have kind of the heart of Christ, it's really helpful. And then also saying, I'm here to learn. Like, what is it? There's a problem here, and we got to get to the bottom of it. So there's a humility of going, you're not walking into that conversation, that moment of truth. You actually don't know all the things. That you're inviting them in to help you understand that. And that's actually really important. And then this is a big one, provide specific examples and feedback. It can't just be like, well, I just feel, or it seems like. Now, you can have those conversations as you're saying, it seems like you're upset at me. Did I do something to offend you? I've had those conversations.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, I go, that gives me the opportunity to go, I am so sorry. I didn't,
Right.
That's not my intention. You're right. And then how can I make it right? And so make sure you're having that, and then focus on behaviors, not on personal attributes, like, hey, it's this, you're not attacking the person, you're attacking like their behavior. And there's a lot of ways that we want to assume into those. Like, oh, you just want my job, and so you're doing this. And it's like, no, that's just,
Right. It's a difference between saying, hey, it seems like you don't really care about these deliverables, and saying, hey, we noticed that 80% of the deliverables were missed on this.
Big difference.
Right? Big difference in that conversation, right? You're attacking the person versus
things.
You're assuming too that, something about why they're not performing or whatever.
It's good.
And then I think after the conversation, and this is really important too, is make sure you have a clear path for how you're going to move forward.
Yeah.
Not just how you're going to have the employee move forward to do better.
Yeah.
But even, I would say, have a clear path for how you as a leader are going to move forward in the relationship.
Absolutely.
With that individual. Because the worst thing, I think, is to have one of these conversations, which, let's be honest, they can be pretty humiliating for the employee,
it's
right?
Tough,
for the staff person. It's tough to hear, hey, you're not doing well, or I'm displeased, or whatever. And the worst thing is for them to go away feeling like, oh man, Tommy doesn't like me anymore. Tommy hates me. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. All of that stuff, right? So you have to be careful to not be dismissive about what's happened in the relationship with that employee. That they may be carrying something from that conversation that you want to be clear about too. So after the conversation, again, have a clear path for moving forward. If structure or leadership is a problem, make sure they're clear on like what's going to happen, what's going to be different, right?
And then do it.
Yeah. And like I said, it's okay to say, hey, let me get back to you, because sometimes the structure thing, the solution might not be real obvious. So you might have to go back and talk to some other people and go, hey, how can we make this better? Again, going back to the consensus conversation, right? And then if the employee does need to change the behaviors, then make sure we provide a clear development plan, a personnel development plan. Now, just to be transparent here, UIWI, I think you and I, and we've just led the organization sort of intuitively, but we haven't been great about formalizing a lot of these structures.
That's right,
and they weren't formalized before you got here, to be fair.
Yeah.
So we have been in the process in the last 5 years since you've been here of formalizing a lot of those structures that were maybe implied or stated, but not written down.
Yeah.
Policies, right, are structures as well. Procedures are structures as well. And so we're just working really hard to make sure those things are all formalized, so that there's a really clear structure in the organization that people know how they're supposed to kind of navigate through the organization.
Which is important because as you grow and as we grow, it'll get farther away from total engagement with you and I. It'll get a lot farther away. And so if we had 30, 40, 50 employees, 100 employees, 200, like that's why building the culture is so important. That's why this is so, so important. And I hope that you guys listen from this. So really, it just in conclusion, in this kind of topic of really what do you do when someone's underperforming, we just want you as a leader to understand the process that we're explaining helps create the type of culture that you want in your organization.
Yeah.
One that's high performing, that's impactful, that will do what God has given you to do. It's really important, but it helps you grow and foster that growth culture and that mindset, which is really important. You want that. And then people want to work for places like that as well. Just know performance issues come up.
They will.
In fact, they do, and they will, and it's actually a gift.
Yeah.
Because it'll help you as a leader grow better. It'll help them as an employee or a leader grow better. And it helps the overall. It's a triple win, really. Yeah. And so it's really important that you do it, but that you handle it with compassion and with humility and with wisdom. And then, if it does in those moment of truth conversations, that's the goal. The better you get at that, the better your organization will be, the better leader you'll be, and the better leader they will be. And so we hope that's been helpful for you guys today. And so thanks for joining us on this, especially as we talk about what do you do when your people are underperforming. Hope that's been good to you. Make sure you subscribe, like, share this. Make sure you send this to all the leaders you know. And we'll see you guys next time.